Dame Harriet Walter has two Emmy nominations this year for Succession and for Ted Lasso. I'm David Buchanan with Gold Derby. Harriet, it's such a pleasure to be with you today. Congratulations on both of your Emmy nominations this year.
It's pretty good, isn't it? I'm doubly pleased.
It is absolutely wonderful. Tell us how you heard the news first and foremost, and how does it feel? You know, is it just thrilling to have two performances recognized this year?
Absolutely. I mean, the first thing that happened was I got a little text from the makeup artist on Ted Lasso saying congratulations, and I thought, what for? You know, that's a nice way to find out. And then I followed that through, and she said, you know, I'm delighted. And then the next thing I knew was I was having a sort of a conference call with my agents, all screaming down the phone saying how brilliant. And I was meanwhile walking through the town of Tewkesbury, which is a beautiful town, but it's extremely sort of remote, and it was raining, and I was looking for some supper before doing a concert, and there was nowhere open because everything shuts in provincial England at 4:30. So it was a very surreal place to be finding out about such a glamorous accolade.
Well, congratulations again. And let's talk about, you know, I'm so glad to have the chance to talk about both roles today because they are so different. The characters are different. The women are so unique, and they're certainly different as mothers. But I wanted to kind of ask, do you see any similarities between the two, or was your approach to these two characters, you know, similar or just vastly different?
Totally different. I was so determined not to just sort of be boxed into a sort of, oh, she plays horrible mothers category. So actually I'd established Caroline Collingwood in Succession before I even got the role of Deborah in Ted Lasso. So I'd established her. So I thought, right, I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to make her kooky and goofy and ditzy and, you know, everything that Caroline isn't really, and kind of probably a very neglectful mother as well, but without really realizing it, for different reasons. Mainly because she's quite needy herself, I think, and put her husband before her child. But, you know, these are all very, most families, every family knows what it's like to blame your mother for everything. And I get quite defensive of mothers. I think, you know, they're supposed to be perfect. And if they do anything wrong, everybody hates them. So I get a little bit prickly and sensitive about when people say these are horrible, horrible women. I never think anybody I play is horrible.
Yeah, I have to agree. And let's talk about Succession, because you submitted the episode Chianti Shore, which is just such a wonderful piece. And speaking of, you know, how people perceive Carolyn, there's that fabulous speech and scene opposite Shiv talking about being a mother and the past. So just wanted to ask you first, what was it about that episode that made you want to choose it for the Emmy ballot? What really stands out to you in that performance?
Well, we've seen a lot of sort of crystal cut glass in Caroline, you know, and this was her off the record, off show, kind of slightly drunk with a little bit of in vino veritas, and something much, I think your relationship with your daughter, if you're a woman, is so different from your relationship with your son. I think it's and you can see just physically Sarah and I are so different. You kind of think, oh well, she's more of a chip off the old block, the you know, the Logan block, and therefore there's some antagonism that goes on that's reflective of what the marriage might have had in it. It's very complicated. I love complicated scenes. I love scenes where you don't say everything, and there's enough left to guesswork and speculation and confusion. So I thought that was just an interesting sort of tip of the iceberg type of scene. And we hadn't really gone into much depth with Caroline. She'd been this sort of, I'm not going to tell you what's going on in my mind kind of person. So that's what drew me to it, really.
Yeah, it's a wonderful scene. And as you're saying too, it's so nuanced because Caroline is being a little bit manipulative and even says some cruel things, but I think your performance brings out such pathos in the character too. You really feel for, you know, both Shiv and Caroline. Can you just talk a bit more about, walking that tightrope as an actor, because it's so rich, as you're saying.
Well, I think I've played a lot of, I mean, if you play sort of strong-minded women, which I tend to have been cast as, possibly just because of my looks, I don't know if I am very strong-minded, but if you play them a lot, if you've played sort of Hedda Gabler and Cleopatra and Lady Macbeth and all these people like I have, you develop this sort of idea that no perpetrator of hurt believes they are a perpetrator. They usually believe they're a victim of hurt. I've found that's quite a clue, or else they feel powerless and that's why they exert power. That's sort of been my discovery over the years of trying to get behind these sorts of characters. And so when it came to playing Caroline in that scene, it was very much sort of, it was fed by, I'm not going to play the exterior of what the world or Sarah, I mean, not Sarah, Shiv, what the world or Shiv will perceive. I'm playing the interior of somebody who's feeling rather paranoid, rather got at, rather misunderstood, rather, because those are the feelings I think she feels, and she lashes out in all sorts of directions from that place. And in my backstory, I've got quite a lot of damage from her childhood. So we know that that perpetuates and causes a cycle. Plus, what must it have been like to be married to Logan Roy? I ask you.
We can only imagine. We can only imagine. I want to ask you about your relationship with one of the other children on the show too, because Roman, of your three children, seems most rankled by the news that you're getting married. So I just wanted to ask you about, how would you characterize their relationship? It's so different from how she interacts with Kendall or Shiv. And do you think he's right to be concerned about Peter, or is Caroline genuinely in love with this fellow?
Well, you see, again, I love the fact that Jesse's written this kind of, well, the team have written this kind of contradiction where I believe she's genuinely amused and fond, wants to remarry for all sorts of reasons. She's going to be lonely. She's going to be on her own. She likes to have fun and games. She likes to go partying. She likes to go on trips. And here's someone who can keep that going. She's got the money. And he's not been very clever with money. But I think it's very hard to explain, particularly to your children, what you see in somebody new. But you feel defensive because you're up against the fact that they think you've been quite disloyal. She's aware of all those things. And so she says things like, he's ghastly. I know he's ghastly, but that there must be some reason why she wants to be with this guy. There wasn't a lot of footage left in the final cut to show that relationship. But the little bits that we did do, we were having an awfully good time because he makes her laugh. And that's attractive to a woman. So there's that. I think it's interesting you say that, because I think you're right about Roman, that he does feel it the most. I think he's the only one that she's remotely cuddly with. I mean, he elicits that from her. I mean, whatever else you think, she did stay with those children for, it must have been 6-7 years. Maybe flitting out at night and going off places, but she came back home and she cuddled them, presumably mostly cuddled Roman because he was the littlest. So there might be something of her infantilizing her youngest that put him in that place, that made him feel comfortable with her. And then he's got all those other kind of kooky things going on with his sex life, which I don't think Caroline knows anything about.
Before I turn to Ted Lasso, I do want to ask you about your pivotal role in the season finale and that incredible betrayal at the end of the season. Just what was your reaction when you read that script for the first time and saw, what Caroline does to her children?
Well, maybe someone will scream at me for this, but I don't remember. The scene wasn't quite like that when I read it. There was a scene where I actually was in the room with Logan and everybody, and then I think they rightly thought this is better. It's more Caroline to do it on the, you know, from her kind of bunker somewhere else, to lob the explosion from far off and run. But I also think, you know, it was sort of weird timing on the day of her wedding, you know, or the day after her wedding or whatever. She wouldn't be that concerned. Again, because you don't see so much of her relationship with Peter, that is minimized in the sort of on the screen, you know, and tells a more kind of edgy story. But from my interior point of view, the thought of, you know, I'm moving on. These kids have had it easy. They've got to start to learn to look after themselves. Logan's, I think, you know, it came from Logan, kind of this idea, you know, I don't think she cooked it up. I don't think she was sitting there in the scene with Shiv going, I know I'm going to dump you in it. I personally didn't know that that was the way the story was going when I learned that scene. Do you see what I mean? So I was feeding completely different stuff into my head during that scene with Shiv. I was not thinking, I'm going to betray you guys. It was very much, I was as shocked as the audience are with this sudden volte-face. And I think it was, you know, she justifies it by saying, you know, you kids have got to leave this, you've got to cut the umbilical cord, you've got to go on your own. I can't look after you, you know, you're grown-ups, you can deal with it. I've got this husband who really needs help, and he's my future, you're not my future. It's that kind of a thinking. But I think she was as hijacked as they've been, but she went along with it for her reasons. But what I do resist is the idea that all the time she was thinking, I'm going to dump you, you know. I don't think that was happening.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think that it comes across that way either in the scene. I think, you know, Logan's fingerprints are all over that. Okay, let's turn to Ted Lasso. And Deborah, who is such a witty and bubbly character and makes two incredible entrances. I mean, she really knows how to make an entrance as a character. I just wanted to ask, you know, when you read that first script, because you submitted the episode The Signal on the Emmy ballot, what was it about that very first episode when you read it that really jumped off the page in terms of who Deborah is as a character?
Well, again, it was just it's the surprise element, I think, because, you know, the way I'd watched I'd watched the show, and you don't think of Rebecca having a mother. Do you know what I mean? You don't, you just, that's not in the landscape. And so it was wonderful for me that you know, Jason, everybody sort of thought up this character to put in a different slant on Rebecca, to perhaps make her look more vulnerable, to, you know, to bring in a completely different side swipe on her. And I just, again, these things, you know, if they're too schematic, it kind of, you can read it coming up ahead, you know. It was the fact that it's kind of not completely explained, the relationship, but you get the idea that she's one of those women who her husband comes first, her husband comes first, her husband comes first. And attention from her husband is what she needs and what she needs and what she needs. And, you know, maybe it was her father before her, you know, could do all sorts of potted psychiatry about it. But it just means that she's rather neglected her daughter in a certain way, because what came first was her dad. Do you know what I mean? There's kind of some people who neglect their husband because they dote on their children too much, and some people neglect their children because they dote on their husband too much. I'm being very broad here, but that's kind of the outline that I was following. And I just love the fact that she's trying to be, you know, she wants to be a bit of a girl, you know, she wants to be quite racy and get cut loose in London and wear a leopard skin coat, you know, but she's actually quite a suburban little disappointed housewife, really. And she's, you know, the fact that she's going to a psychic, the fact that she's got all these sort of ideas about I don't know, she's got her little philosophy about, she's very much her own woman in a funny way. She probably doesn't get on with her neighbors terribly well because she's probably seen as a little bit odd. But she's a surprising mother for Rebecca to have.
Absolutely agree. And I love too that she says early on in that first episode that she's a work in progress. She kind of announces that to the whole team on the pitch. So I just wanted to ask you about that too. What do you think it is about her that she's trying to improve? Because we do see, maybe she's stuck in a pattern with, wanting to leave her husband and then, going back, as Rebecca tells us. But what is it that she identifies in herself that she wants to improve upon, do you think?
I think she feels that she's been very weak with her husband. I think he's ruled the roost. He's set the rules. And there's a sense in which she feels, I haven't followed my spirit. I haven't developed my inner self, which I'm sending it up, but it's a very common feeling amongst people who may be married very young and they've always been somebody's wife, somebody's mother, somebody's daughter, and they're looking for who am I, which is considered self-indulgent in a mother, in a woman who should be, we have a lot of prejudice against that search for yourself. We encourage it in ourselves when we're young, but we don't want our mothers to be searching for herself, but it's, I think she thinks that she's going to be a bigger person, a more confident person. I think she's very aware that she's not very confident. She feels she hasn't lived life, she hasn't been to the rave that is life. And she still thinks, she's at that tip of the age, she's at the foothills of old age, and she's thinking, if I don't do it now, I want those adventures. And it's kind of tragic in a way, because I don't think she's going to have them. I don't know.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see if we see Deborah again. I do want to ask you too about working with Hannah, because you develop over 2 episodes such a wonderful rapport, and the characters, the dynamic is so fascinating and rich. So just talk about working with her.
I think you can blame Hannah for that. I think you can blame her for being such a big-hearted actor, because you can guest on something that's very established and you can be made to feel, okay, fit in with us or else. Or you can be really welcomed, which I was. It was, she rang me up when I was cast. She said, so excited to meet you. I so want to work with you. She did all that. She, without being phony in any way, she was like the hostess of the party, and she welcomed me in. And I responded to that instantly. If you give me that, I'll jump up, and so we met like this, and took it off from there. And I think that's just incredibly important, because you do feel very insecure when you walk into something that's very established, particularly a sort of very, American team of writers. It's kind of an American humor, and, is my sense of humor going to fit with this? That's quite hard to deal with on your first day. But that, actually Jason, everybody were very warm and friendly anyway, but there's something different. There's something really sisterly about Hannah. She's a very good chemistry.
No question. And it really comes across on the screen. But before I let you go, I do want to ask you a question about your damehood. We're quite a few years out from you receiving the honor. So I just wanted to ask you, reflecting on that and that time in your life, what that means to you now.
The damehood is now, I kind of forget about it, because it's so, I've been a dame as long as I've been married. So I became a missus at the same time as I became a dame, and they both, I've got used to both things now. As it is in this period of history, titles and things like that are, they're not as important as they used to be. So there isn't that kind of sense of, oops, I've got to, be polite to her. It doesn't set up a barrier like it might have done if I was younger. I mean, if it had happened, if I was of a different generation, because I worked with Dame Peggy Ashcroft when I was young. And I went on tour with her, and she said, let's go out to lunch. And she was like 75 and I was 30. And I thought, oh, I've got to go out to lunch. And I kind of almost put on white gloves, you know, and I behaved frightfully well. And I thought, now that I'm getting not quite that far up the line, but nearly, I think, oh, she just wanted to have lunch. She was alone on tour and she wanted a pal. So I'm very glad that the sort of hierarchical system and the class system is leveling out more in this country.
Dame Harriet Walter, congratulations again on 2 wonderful nominations for Succession and Ted Lasso. Thanks so much for talking to Gold Derby today.
Thank you.